Dr. Janet Woititz is author of Marriage on the Rocks, Going Home, a reentry guide for the newly sober, Struggle for Intimacy, which is dedicated to adult children of alcoholics, and the bestseller, Adult Children of Alcoholics. Dr. Woititz is on the faculty of the Rutgers Summer School of Alcohol Studies. She's an international consultant and lecturer, and in her private practice, Dr. Woititz specializes in the treatment of families affected by alcoholism. Here's Dr. Janet Woititz.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. I'm going to be spending a lot of time this evening talking about some of the difficulties that adult children of alcoholics face. But I want you to know that I am constantly amazed at some of the things that happen with adult children of alcoholics that I'm convinced would happen with no other group. For example, what other group of people could I be talking to where they knew in advance that I was going to be talking about things that for some of them might be real difficult and for some of them might be real painful, and yet they give you such a lovely, warm reception? I've never known a group who were more anxious to find out about themselves, more anxious to come to grips with the reality of their lives. I've also had a lot of experiences that I am certain I would not have had with any other group. For example, I was doing a conference in Canada, and during the first break in the morning, we were in a hotel that was 26 stories high. During the first break in the morning, there was a hotel fire, and we were just out having our coffee. Somebody finally came to us and said, "You're going to have to go down to the lobby." So we went down to the lobby carrying our coffee cups. When I came up to give my presentation a little while later, I said to the group of people that were assembled to listen to me, I said, "I want you to know that you have given yourselves away, because I promise you that any group of people who had not lived with alcoholism might consider a hotel fire a crisis. But if you have lived with alcoholism, if the flame is not at your pant leg, you do not count it at all." Last summer at Rutgers, one of my students came to me and she said, "I'm a nun and a recovering alcoholic and also the adult child of an alcoholic. Would you be willing to come to Philadelphia and speak to my community? Many of us are adult children and many of us are working in schools where we confront these issues every day." I said, "Terrific. I would be happy to do it." And we settled on a date the following January. I didn't hear from her, and so I just decided that something had happened, it wasn't going to work out, and I forgot about it. It was scheduled for a Friday evening, and I made a dental appointment for that afternoon, from 2 to 4:30. Early that week, she called me up and she said, "I just called to let you know where you would be speaking in Philadelphia at 6 o'clock on Friday." And I said, "I didn't hear from you, and I made a dental appointment, and I don't change my dental appointments because I won't make another one." She said, "The flyers went out." I said, "I did not get a flyer, and I am not changing my appointment." I knew, though, that I was dealing with the adult child of an alcoholic. When adult children of alcoholics get ideas in their head, that is it. There are no other options. There are no other alternatives. And here I am the idea. She said, "Don't worry, I will get back to you." I said, "Fine." The following day, she called me up and she said, "No problem. Someone is going to pick you up at the dentist." I said, "Well, okay, if the Novocaine is worn off by 6 o'clock, I will speak to your community." Early that Friday, I got a call from the dentist. He said, "Would you mind coming in a couple hours early? These nuns may have pipelines that are not available to the rest of us." Many such things happen because adult children understand crisis, and as a result of that, they were able to accomplish things that other people are not. As I opened, I mentioned that I have never known a group of people more anxious for help. I've never known a group of people more eager to find out about their world. And unlike alcoholics who generally need someone to encourage them into treatment, or spouses who generally need to hit some kind of bottom or to feel that their lives are unmanageable before they get into treatment, this is not true for adult children. They are very, very eager. Unfortunately, if the adult child goes to a therapist who does not understand what it means to grow up in this kind of family system, they end up in more difficulty than when they began. The people that I have seen that have been most distressed, the people that I have seen in the most difficulty, the people that I have seen that I have come closest to needing to hospitalize were those adult children who had been to therapists who did not understand what it meant to grow up in an alcoholic home. And there are very real reasons for this. Firstly, if you grew up with alcoholism, you do not have the database that other children do. You simply do not have the kinds of information that other children get. You don't have the tools for living that someone learns automatically in a more typical household. Simple experiences like going with your mother to the supermarket and spending an hour walking up and down the aisles and looking at the different foods and the different prices and the different people and having your questions answered. I'm always fascinated when I fly someplace and there are children on the plane that are asking questions. And do you know what their parents are doing? They are answering those questions. If you grew up with alcoholism, this is an experience that you didn't have. It's not unusual when a child of an alcoholic goes into treatment to say something like, I don't know what to do about. They're not saying to the therapist, run my life, or tell me what to do. They're saying, I don't know what to do about. And the traditional psychotherapist will say something like, well, what do you think? Now, we're talking about very compliant people, so they will look within themselves to find that answer. It's not going to be there. But they will make up something to please the therapist. And week after week, they will come up with other things wrong with us in order to please the therapist, not ever recognizing that the reason why they didn't know what to do was because they simply didn't know what to do. So it's real important when one works with the adult child of an alcoholic and they say, I don't know what to do about, to say, what are your options? What are your alternatives? What are the consequences of these ideas? What will happen is you will get a blank stare. They simply are not aware of what their options are. So it becomes real important to say, let's take a look at what some of these possibilities are, and then reflect on what action you want to take. Another thing that adult children are prone to do in therapy is say why. They don't really mean why, they mean how. But they will say why. And the traditional psychotherapist will say something like, why is an intellectual exercise understood best in retrospect? We're dealing with gut feelings here. Well, it may or may not be a way to avoid dealing with gut feelings. But these are questions that need to be answered. The how needs to be answered. When I was in Houston not too long ago, there was a man in my workshop involved with employee assistance programs, and he said to me, I've had it with adult children. I have really had it. They come into my office and they have lots of complaints about their boss, lots of complaints about the company. They want to be running their divisions. They want to be running the company. And I'm really tired of it. And I don't know what to do about it. I said, no problem. The next time you have this experience, all you have to do is say, tell me, if you were president of this company, what process would you follow in order to affect the changes that you want to see? Tell me how you would do it. That will take care of it. Because adult children do not have a sense of process. They're not aware of the fact that things have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They do the beginnings real well, and they do the ends pretty good, but that stuff in the middle seems to be lost. So this is real critical when we talk about working with adult children, to be aware of the fact that that data simply is not present, and that their questions need to be answered. Everyone in their lives needs to have at least one person that they can ask all of these questions to. And even ask the questions that haven't been formulated yet. Quite often you know that there's something that disturbs you, but you don't even know what to ask. Preferably, the person that you choose is not the adult child. You need to pick someone who has the database. That's the first issue. And I think that this is really critical, because many of the people that I see, once they get the information that they need, no longer need the therapist. They just need the tools in order to be more effective in their lives. Many people have asked me, when do the effects of being the child of an alcoholic begin? My mother didn't start drinking until after I left home. Am I the adult child of an alcoholic? It becomes clear and clear that not only did it affect you if your parents drank, it also affected you if their parents drank. We must look at 3 generations. And if we begin to look at where the effects begin, it becomes clearer and clearer that the effects of being the child of an alcoholic begin in the womb. They begin before you are born. There is no responsible professional in the alcohol field who does not accept the disease model. This means that there is not only a genetic predisposition, but there is an effect on the body chemistry. What does this mean to the newborn child? What are we finding out more and more? We are finding out that children of alcoholics have a disproportionate number of allergies. We are finding out that there are a disproportionate number of children of alcoholics who are hyperactive. There's a disproportionate number of children of alcoholics who are super sensitive to sugar. Many of them have learning disabilities, perceptual problems, and some people are beginning to do research on the effects of premenstrual syndrome on children of alcoholics. We must be aware of all of these things for children and for adult children of alcoholics, because they tend to have an effect in how we perceive the world. Let me give you a couple of examples of how the database and some of these other things come into play. There was a young man in my practice. He was about 28 years old when he came in to see me, convinced of 2 things, which is not unusual for adult children of alcoholics. There were 2 things that he knew about himself. One was that he was crazy, and the other that he was stupid. I did not see too much evidence of either, but this is what he was sure of. The way that he knew that he was crazy was that as a child of 8 years old, when he was what they called acting out, because he had a violent alcoholic father and couldn't express any of his feelings at home, what happened to him at that time was that they locked him up in a state mental hospital. He said to me, "Jan, you're going to tell me that I wasn't crazy, but what if I was?" I said, "Do you believe that someone can recover from mental illness?" I said, "Absolutely. I've devoted my life to it," he said. The horror is not if you were crazy. The horror is that you probably were not. And then we had to address the other part of it. The other part of it had to do with the fact that he knew he was stupid because he was 8 years getting his bachelor's degree. And here it was 3 weeks before the end of the semester, and he was certain that he was going to do something to sabotage it again. I asked him for all his school records. "I would like to know everything that's ever been written up about you," I said. And back at that time, when they decided to hospitalize him, they also did a complete workup. And they found out that he had some perceptual problems. It was diagnosed, but never addressed. My comment to him then was, I don't want you to write your papers. I want you to record them into a cassette, we'll transcribe them and edit them. He said, that would be cheating. Because no one along the way had said to him, there are different ways of learning. Different people have different learning styles. You do not have to do it the way that everybody else does it. You do not have to pretend that you are like everybody else. I very simply said to him, cheat. We'll adjust to it later. He got all A's and B's, and he got his bachelor's degree. The critical things that I knew about this young man was that he was the adult child of an alcoholic. So we had to look at things somewhat differently than we did with other people. Certainly now that his life has turned around and things are going well, he needs help in order to adjust to that. But the reality is that he did not have the information in order to behave differently. And he was playing out this life script. Another example of this kind of thing has to do with a young woman who came to me because she was anorexic and bulimic. We see a lot of eating disorders among children of alcoholics. She had behaved in this way for about 10 years. It started because she wanted the attention of her alcoholic mother. And children do not care about the nature of attention. They just want attention. Well, when she got down to 70 pounds and dehydrated herself and landed in the hospital, sure enough, they paid attention. But she carried this with her. And she saw this, and with the help of her therapist, because she had been in therapy most of this time, she saw this as symptomatic of the fact that she hated herself and she was in deep psychological trouble. I find more and more that behaviors which in another family system might really indicate severe psychological illness, with the alcohol family system are simply adaptive. But what happens when one gets older is that they are no longer useful. I prefer not to use words like sick and well. I prefer to use words like useful and not useful. I think you label yourselves very quickly sick. And I am not certain that these behaviors are really sick at all. Well, she came in to see me. And here again, the fact that she had grown up in an alcohol family system was critical to my beginning to help her look at these issues. The first thing that I said to her was, if you did not have this eating disorder, how would you eat? What would you have for breakfast? What would you have for lunch? What would you have for dinner? What are the calorie requirements for someone of your age and size? She looked at me. She said, you know, when I was growing up, you just grabbed what you could. We get back once again to the database. She didn't know how to do it differently. My first assignment to her was, I want you to go out and read a couple of books on nutrition. I want you to find out how to eat properly, what would be good nourishment for you, and then we'll talk again. So this is exactly what she did. When she came in the second time, I asked her another question which related back to her history. I said, tell me, what is it that you binge on? Sugar. I said, wait a minute. You're an addict. That's your problem. We're going to have to treat this as if it's an addiction. And there are many who believe that one of the alcoholisms, because we know now that there's not just one alcoholism, that there are a number of alcoholisms, one of the alcoholisms has to do with the way that the body metabolizes sugar. I said, you're an alcoholic. You just haven't chosen ethyl alcohol. So between now and the next time I see you, I would like you to go to open AA meetings and to Overeaters Anonymous, which she did. And when she came back, she said to me, you know, I felt at home for the first time in my life. Maybe I'm not a moral degenerate. And that's where we began. 10 years of therapy, but the awareness of the fact that she didn't have the database in order to behave differently and what the body chemistry might be like makes the difference in how we begin to look at these issues. I believe it's critical. If you learn nothing else from me, learn that a lot of the things that give you concern about yourself may be things that you simply do not know, questions that you really need to ask. One of the other things that I hear about children of alcoholics, or adult children of alcoholics, has to do with the fact that they have low self-esteem. You may have heard that expression, low self-esteem. As a matter of fact, I did my doctoral dissertation on self-esteem in children of alcoholics. I was told by my committee that what I was doing was irrelevant, insignificant, and I would never be proud of it. That was one thing that they agreed on. However, I was living with active alcoholism at the time, and so I did not realize this was meant to discourage me, and I went ahead with the project. I must share with you now the fact that I no longer believe in self-esteem as an issue for children of alcoholics. In order to have a high self-esteem or a low self-esteem, you have to have a sense of self. And children of alcoholics, for some very real reasons, do not have this. Many of you, I'm certain, have gone to a lot of groups where your self-esteem is supposed to be enhanced. Assertiveness training, Nautilus, go back to school, lose those 10 pounds, and everybody else in the group is feeling wonderful, but not you. You are doing all these things and you still feel as badly about yourself as you did before you went in. But now, and this is one of your best things, you have something else to beat yourself about because you're supposed to be feeling better and you're not. Some of the reasons why this happens has to do with the real early messages that you got as children. For most of us, when we get double messages, we get to pick one. If you grew up in an alcohol family system, and the double messages that you get are somewhat different because both parts of the message are true. And the early messages are internalized, and you carry them with you into adulthood, and they play out in different kinds of ways over and over and over again. The first of these messages is, I love you, go away. You knew somehow that your parent loved you, just because they were alcoholic or just because they were addicted to the alcoholic. And I'm never really sure who causes the most distress in children, whether it's the alcoholic or the codependent. I've never been really able to figure that one out. But the message that the child gets from both parents is, I love you, go away. The go away part relates to, I don't have the time or the energy to give you what you need. Now, what happens when you grow up with this as your messages? What happens as an adult is that this is the way that you understand love. Did you ever wonder why the person that is most attractive to you is the one who is warm and loving one day and rejecting the next? Those are the ones that really hook you in, because it plays right into your childhood fantasy of, this time things will be different. If I am only good enough, if I am only smart enough, if I am only warm enough, if I am only intelligent enough, this time it will work out right. So these are the people that are very, very attractive to you. And the person who is there for you consistently, the person who does things like call when they say they will. Boring. They hold no interest for you at all. It may be for adult children that if you want to begin to define what a healthy relationship is all about, it's boring. Because it means that this person will say things to you tomorrow that are very similar to what he or she said the day before. If they cared about you yesterday, they will care about you tomorrow. And if they say that they will be someplace at a particular time, you can depend on it. Little unsettling, but this is part of what it's all about. It's also contrary to your life script. So it's not unusual for you to do something to change that. Okay, if there's someone who is consistent, it's not unusual for you to do something to try and sabotage that relationship to make it at least a little bit interesting. But that's a part of your life script. That's part of the way that you were set up. The second double message is, you can't do anything right, I need you. If you grew up in a home with alcoholism, no matter what you did, it wasn't good enough. If you got A's, where were the A pluses? Or if by chance you should bring home that A plus, well, that teacher doesn't know what he's talking about. Or you were asked to do things, but never given full and complete instructions as to how to do them. And so there was no way that you could possibly do it right. But you knew that you were needed. You knew that your family could not get along without you. And it's more difficult for children of alcoholics to leave home than other children. Although you may leave physically, it's harder to leave psychologically. Because you leave physically because there are clear messages, clear things going on at home that you either agree with or disagree with. And mostly you want to do it your way. But in this kind of family system where there's so much inconsistency, you're not real sure what your way is. So it's much harder to leave. There's also the sense of being a rat leaving a sinking ship. How can I walk out on them when they need me? And particularly if you've left younger siblings behind. The guilt that children of alcoholics feel when they leave home, leaving younger brothers and sisters behind, is very similar to the guilt of the survivor. The guilt that men felt when they were lifted out of Vietnam in helicopters, leaving their buddies behind. How does this play out in relationships later? What it means is that it's not unusual for you to get involved with someone who continually puts you down. You're fat, you're ugly, how can someone so smart be so stupid? And when someone like me says to you, why do you bother with that? Why do you go through this over and over again? You'll say something like, oh, he couldn't get along without me. Or she would just fall to pieces if I wasn't there. This, again, is part of the life script. The third double message is, I'll be there for you. Right? This time, I'll go to back to school night. Money in the bank. And then the other part of the double message is, I give you my word, next time. The unfulfilled promises. The lies that are not lies at the time that they're stated. The positive intent, but it never happens. It absolutely never happens. And what does that mean to you? It means a couple of things to you. The first thing that it means is that you learn real well how to lie. I don't even think it's lying. It's another habit, which is useful in growing up in an alcoholic home, which is no longer useful as an adult. As a child growing up with alcoholism, there is nothing in it for you to tell the truth. It is simply not to your advantage. Because you don't know what the consequences are. So if you tell the truth, you may get into more trouble, you may get into less trouble. Why burden already overburdened parents? The denial that goes on is a form of lie anyway. You live so much in fantasy that you're not real sure of what the truth is. So you can say to a child of an alcoholic, did you drop that book? The child will look at you and say no. And you'll begin to wonder whether or not you saw that child drop that book. As an adult, it's no longer useful. And this is a difficult habit to break. So many adult children will lie automatically, regardless of whether or not it's something that's even worth lying about. I never say that to any of my clients. I never say you're lying. I will say something like, I believe that you believe what you just told me. However, I don't really buy it. This is what comes from that kind of double message. The promise, I'll be home at 6 o'clock, and never happening. Or Saturday we'll go to the movies. And if you don't go immediately, you don't get to go. The other part that happens, and the other part that's internalized for children of alcoholics, is you learn how not to want. How many of you are able to say to someone else, this is what I want from you right now. This is what would make me feel good. Not too many hands going up. Not only are you not able to ask for what you want, but if you're involved in a relationship, that other person is supposed to know what it is. If you want to go out to dinner and the theater for your birthday, they are supposed to know it, right? If you really love me, you could read my mind. Children of alcoholics should only be involved with clairvoyance. The next double message that children of alcoholics get is, everything is fine, don't worry. And how can I deal with all of this? The parent says to you, don't worry about a thing, everything's under control, go to sleep. But they see the parent harassed, they see the parent concerned, they see the parent worried, and they see the parent somewhat overwhelmed. So both of these messages come through. What does this mean in your adult life? How do you play this out later on? It's real simple. If you are married, for example, it's not unusual for you to say to your spouse, I know you put in a hard day. And at the end of the day, why don't you just go home, put your feet up, relax, have a cup of coffee. It is no problem for me after work to pick up the kids. I'll run by the grocery store and get all the things that you need as the cleaners, and I'll throw something on the stove. No problem at all. After a while, you get a little resentful. And will say something to your spouse like, why am I the only one that ever does anything around here? The usual answer is something like, well, what do you want me to do? To which you reply, if you really loved me, you would know. This is another setup from childhood. This is another way that you play out the life script. The fifth double message here, and one that I find extremely damaging, generally comes into play at the time where we gain a certain amount of awareness of what alcoholism is all about. It's not unusual for a parent to say to a child, you shouldn't feel that way. Your mother didn't mean it. She has a disease. You shouldn't feel that way. Your father didn't mean to smash up the car. He has a disease. We tend not to hold alcoholics accountable for their behavior. So one of the things that happens here is that children learn to repress their feelings. They learn it is not okay to feel what they feel. It is not okay to be angry even though they are angry because their parent has a disease. It is not okay to be embarrassed even though they are embarrassed because their parent has a disease. And they end up feeling very much ashamed of themselves because of these feelings which they must keep to themselves because they've been told their parent has a disease. What happens here, a couple of things happen here. First of all, what happens is that this is one of the ways in which we help our children to develop their own alcohol problem later. Because the underlying message is, gee, if I am drunk, I can do whatever I want. So it becomes important to recognize that although you understand that someone has a disease, you still have a whole lot of feelings around it. You're still angry, you're still embarrassed, you're still upset, you still don't like it. And we cannot jump from understanding to forgiveness. We must recognize it. We must come to grips with all of the feelings around it, resolve those feelings, and then let go of it. And then we can forgive. We can't go past those steps. How does this play out in relationships later? This too has real important implications because it means that the rest of us can get away with just about anything. You will find an excuse for the most inexcusable behavior. Not only will you find an excuse for something, which has no rationale, but more often than not, you will find a way that you are to fault, even if you're out of town. This is one aspect of where self-esteem is affected. There's another aspect here too, and that has to do with values. Most of us behave according to our value system, whether we own up to it or not. If you really valued going to church every Sunday, you would do it. But in this family system, people do not act according to their values. I don't know a man alive who really believes the following day that his wife needed to be beaten up the night before. I don't know a woman alive who really believes the following day that it was okay to pick up that man in the bar and go to bed with him. That is why the remorse is so overwhelming, because it is inconsistent with the people that they believe that they are. And that's one of the reasons why the spiritual part of the program becomes so important and forgiving oneself becomes so important, because that is not the person that they know themselves to be. However, what this does to the child is very, very confusing. What it does to the child is to say, in effect, that adults don't say what they mean, nor do they mean what they say. So it is very difficult for a child growing up in this family system to be able to have a good, strong set of what they believe in and what they don't believe in. Because we get those messages from our parents. And it doesn't matter whether or not we agree with our parents' values. It matters that we have a sense of what they are so that we can accept them or we can reject them. Those are two aspects where self-esteem is affected. Probably some of you are curious as to, well, what do you do about it? Okay? You spelled this out. What do you do about it? Most of the people writing about child development talk about the early years as being critical in the development of the child's personality. And since most of us really hate what happened to you as kids, I mean, we really hate it. We would just as soon forget it and go on. Say, put that aside and let's live in the here and now, one day at a time, and forget it. Well, you cannot forget it. It simply doesn't work. We have to recognize it, but not recognize it only in the negative side. We tend to dismiss the skills that adult children develop in their childhood. We've changed the vocabulary from victim to survivor, but I'm continually impressed at what I see with children with alcohol. And we do not tend to give them credit for what they do. When I come to speak to you or to another group at a time like this, I leave my littlest child at home. And before I leave, I will say to him a variety of things like, will your sister be home in time to fix your dinner? And he will say, Ma, don't worry about it. If she's not home, I'll fix my own dinner. Or I will say something to him like, is your shirt clean for soccer? And he will say, Ma, if my shirt is not clean, I will wash it. Do not worry about it. And I will say, do you have your key? And about this time, he loses patience. Because he sees himself as being real capable. And I see him as being real capable. And since I'm an academic, not only does he get points for being real capable, but he gets points for independence training and achievement motivation. And he has been doing this since he was 5 or 6 years old. If I was an active alcoholic, we would not be saying this about a child who was doing the same things. We would say, oh, that poor child is taking on an adult role prematurely. So here this one child feels pretty terrific about what he's able to do, and the other child does not. The other child feels, oh, I shouldn't have had to do that. There was something wrong with me that I had to do that. We do not teach children of alcoholics to take pride in their skills. I had an 8-year-old girl referred to me about a year ago. She was awakened in the middle of the night to see her mother shooting herself in the head with a gun. The child called the emergency number. The child went to the hospital with her mother and stayed with her mother all night. The child, in effect, saved the mother's life. And when she came in to see me, it was because of recurring nightmares. And I said to her, tell me about your nightmares. She said, the nightmare is, what if I hadn't awakened? That's not the nightmare of an 8-year-old child. The roles had reversed. She was now the parent. The nightmare of an 8-year-old child is, oh my God, what if I lose my mommy? This is a terrible story, and I'm sure many of you know such terrible stories. And we want the child to get done with her nightmare. But we also need to say to that little girl, boy, am I impressed that you were able to do that. Boy, am I impressed that you had the presence of mind to be able to call the emergency number. Boy, am I impressed that you were able to go through that whole experience with your mother. Not many little girls of 8 years old were able to do that. You see, what happens is, we know that children of alcoholics are denied their childhood. We talk a lot about the fact that adult children of alcoholics don't know how to play. But we don't give them credit for their adulthood because we don't like the fact that it happened to them. It becomes important to recognize that many of you have skills that other kids of your age did not have. The way to build self-esteem is to build it on your accomplishments, is to build it on your skills. Take a moment and reflect back into your own childhood and think a little bit about the things that you were able to do, not whether or not you wanted to, but the things that you were able to accomplish as a child that other kids didn't accomplish. It's not unusual for an 8-year-old child to take over all the family responsibilities. It's not unusual for a 5-year-old to take care of younger siblings. These are skills. And you need to recognize that it may be at your stage of life. I mean, many of you have decided, I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to have kids. I did that. I did that as a kid. I don't want to do it now. But when you look at skills, skills are not roles. Be careful that you don't confuse them. You may not want to play the role of parent in your life now, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the skill to do it if you choose. And choice is what makes it different. In order to build self-esteem, you need to go back into that childhood and to become aware of how remarkable you were, how incredible it was, the way in which you learned to survive, the way in which you learned to cope, and the way in which you developed in ways that other children didn't. You need to be able to give yourself credit for that, rather than just experience the pain and the horror of the fact that you didn't choose to be born into that family. That is the way that you begin to build self-esteem, without being afraid of who you are, because most of you are really very special. People in your lives know that. You are the ones that don't know that. Many people have asked me about the COA groups that are developing, the adult children of alcoholics groups that are developing. There's been a question as to, what do we need those special groups for? You know, why isn't AA and Al-Anon good enough? You know, why do we need special groups for adult children of alcoholics? And there's some real specific reasons why. Firstly, adult children of alcoholics groups are not for beginners. It is very important that you belong to either AA if you are an alcoholic, or Al-Anon, probably 6 months to a year before you ever go to an adult children's group. You won't listen, but I have said it. Okay? Patience is not a virtue with adult children. They're even impatient with the fact that they are not patient. So the best that we can hope for is that you would go to both groups. Okay? The idea is to be grounded in the program. The idea is to understand what those principles are all about, because they are a wonderful way in which to guide your life. However, the issues for adult children are somewhat different. Maybe not so much different, but a little deeper. Firstly, the AA and Al-Anon programs are programs of self-growth. They're not designed for interaction. And interaction is one of the areas where adult children have the most difficulty. I work with a lot of couples who are in AA and Al-Anon doing real well. And yet their marriage is falling apart and they don't know what's going on. They don't know what hit them. Because it's the feelings that have been repressed over a long period of time that are now surfacing, that are unmanageable, and they do not know how to bridge them. And many do not even have the information in order to behave differently. For example, I think of one couple that I see. He's been in AA for about 16 years. She's been in Al-Anon for about the same length of time. When an issue comes up that causes them both to be angry, he knows he should not be hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So he goes to his meeting, and she detaches and goes to hers. And in this one particular situation, the mother-in-law is packing her bags, getting ready to move in, and I keep saying, you're going to have to address the issue. You know? Or things like, I'm not going to tell my mother that I'm moving out. Your mother will find out. I give you my word. She will find out. The issues are not looked at because there are no tools for looking at the issues. And so many of the things that cause people difficulty have to do with the fact that they didn't have the background and they didn't have the training. Do you know that in other kinds of families, there are parents who teach you how to behave in social situations? They teach you what to say, how to carry on a conversation, how to do all of those kinds of things. This one couple that I've been seeing for a while now, they actually only agree on one thing, and that is that she can't stand the sight of him. Okay? And I'm beginning to come around to that point of view myself. Okay? They're not even real sure that they want to be in counseling, but they drive 2 hours to the counseling appointment and are always there. There had been a cocktail party, and he had not paid attention to her during the party, and she saw this as a sign that their marriage was over. Both of these are adult children of alcohol. And she said, because happy couples spend all their time together at parties. I said, hey, wait a minute. This is something that she picked up from television. I said, that may not be true because I know that when I go to a party with someone that I'm real close to, I know what he's going to say. He knows what I'm going to say. So all we really need are signals in case one of us wants to split or one of us is with someone that we don't want to talk to. And we won't spend the evening together. That's brand new information for her. She simply did not know that. Then she said to him, and then when I come up to you and you're talking to your friends, you don't introduce me. Are you embarrassed by me? And he says, no, of course not. I'm very proud of you. And I said to him, how come you don't introduce her? And he said, well, I never thought of it. I can do that. Didn't learn, didn't know it, didn't have the tools, didn't have the information. Becomes real critical. And so I end up being a teacher. Actually, I see myself more as an educator than a therapist. I allow them to call me therapist because it helps with the third-party payments, but if the truth be known, a lot of what goes on is strictly educational. People don't know how to react. They don't know what it means. Just before I left, I had a young man come into my office, stormed into my office. He says, well, the relationship is over. It's done. No more. I've gone around and around and around, and she ruined my birthday. Okay. Let's hear this one, right? He had decided that one of the things that he was going to do this year for his birthday was that he was going to buy himself some gifts. So he went out and he bought himself a half a dozen items of clothing. Stuff that he had really wanted, and he was feeling real good about it. And she came over for his birthday and somehow had purchased for him the same identical articles of clothing that he had bought for himself. Okay? And she got real upset when this happened. And he got real upset that she got real upset that this happened. And took back his keys and his whatever, and this is it. This is the end of the relationship. And I said, hey, wait a minute. Why is this, the fact that she got upset, why is this a sign that she's trying to destroy your birthday? You know, what does it mean? I mean, this is really very funny. Well, that was a new idea to him. Okay? It also means that she knows you very well and knows what your taste is, so she gave a lot of thought and consideration to it. Well, that also was a new idea to him. And thirdly, why did you have to defend yourself? Why couldn't you have gotten on the same side as she was? And felt that she was absolutely in her right to be disappointed that this happened. And these were possibilities that had simply not occurred to him. Because when he was growing up, if ever anyone got upset and angry, he had to automatically become defensive. That was the only response that he knew. So these responses had to be changed. These can be learned in an ACOA group. Other feelings are somewhat different. For example, guilt. Most of you are familiar with guilt, right? There are a number of different levels of guilt. I happen to be an expert in this particular area. My mother, about a year ago, was very, very sick. And we were afraid we were going to lose her. I went up to see her. She was in intensive care. And she had a tube in her arm and a tube in her nose and was coming in and out of the anesthetic. And I didn't even recognize her. Got a little frightened. And she went. And I walked over to my mother, and my mother said, Janet, you really should be wearing a red hat with that coat. I was embarrassing my mother in intensive care, right? I said to myself, I am not going to buy a red hat. Well, I bought the red hat. But I haven't worn the red hat. This is one level of guilt. The level of guilt that people feel in Al-Anon is guilt as a control issue. If I feel guilty because you drink, then I am somewhat responsible. And if I am responsible, then I can do something to change it. And it isn't until one gives up that control that one starts to feel better. But children of alcoholics, many of them do not feel better at that point because the guilt goes so much deeper. I wouldn't have married your father if you hadn't been born. Or things were great until you came along. Did a workshop. There was a woman in the workshop who was 60 years old. And she said to me, Jan, I've been in therapy most of my life. And intellectually I know the answer to this, but I've never been able to come to grips with it. She said, my mother died when I was born. And my alcoholic father said to me, you killed your mother. I've never been able to let go of that. I said to her, tell me, how big were you when you were born? She said, I was about 6 pounds. I said, well, I want you to take a look at that 6-pound baby wrapped in a pink blanket. And you call that baby a killer. You tell that baby that she killed her mother. The woman started to cry. And I said, "What are you feeling?" "I'm feeling relieved." For children of alcoholics, for adult children of alcoholics, many of the issues that they face in their adult life go back to their childhood. It's the child of 6 or 7 that fears the abandonment. It's the child of 5 that fears the loss. It's the child of 5 or 6 or 7 that experiences a lot of the difficult feelings that you all share. And it's that child that needs to be addressed. It's that child that needs to be nurtured. It's that child that continues to haunt you in your adult life. So here and now, we can learn how to behave. But when you really take a good hard look at where you suffer, it goes all the way back there. These are some of the reasons for adult children's groups. It's also a place to check things out. In growing up in an alcoholic home, many of you begin to play both parts. I see this a lot with couples, right? She will tell me and then how she feels, and then she will tell me how he feels. And he will be sitting right there, or the reverse. I was working with one couple, and I finally said to him, because he was asleep most of the session, I said, "I don't think you need to come anymore, because you were speaking for both of you." Okay? But since your questions weren't answered, you make assumptions about what is going on with other people. And you need to learn to check out your reality. It may be different than what it is that you assume it to be. I'd like to close with a story which relates to this in my own life. I have a son of 22 who has just graduated from college. And it's a real joy to me to have a child at home that I no longer have to parent. Last Saturday morning, as is my routine, I get up early and I walk for a mile and I come back into the house. Came back into the house, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, I walk into the kitchen and there is Dave. And he is fully dressed. And I look at him and I said, "Dave, I am absolutely flabbergasted to see you up and dressed before the crack of noon." And I must tell you, it is really a delight to see you. And he turned to me and he said, "It's a delight to see you too, Ma. Good night."